we can study and learn what the Talmud has to say about people that came back from the other side. Today is Wednesday, June 9th, and we are in the Talmud. I'm starting today, if you have the book, Ein Yaakov, the black book, the black Talmud book. I'm starting, let's see where we should start from. Let's start on page 245. Yeah, let's start on page 245, middle of the page. Today's Torah study is dedicated by Diane Weinberg in loving memory of her grandmother, Ita Bas Yitzchak, on the occasion of her yahrzeit a few days ago. May the neshama of Ita Bas Yitzchak be elevated in Gan Eden in the merit of today's Torah study. Okay? Good morning, Winston and Dean Dubensky. Joe G, good morning. Howard and Susan and Terry Zweig, Harvey Barnett and Rob Berger. Fantastic. We got a nice crowd of collecting on Facebook. YouTube, a little Shvachim Isis here for some reason. I don't know what's up with YouTube, but I do see Winston is with us on YouTube. Who knows? Facebook seems to be winning the war here today. Okay, let's do this. All right. So we're in the middle of page 245. If you have the book, follow along. If you don't, just listen along. It's going to be fun. The Talmud tells a story. Well, I'm going to go back just a little bit because it's so cool, this stuff. Okay. I'm going to start in the middle of page 244. Rabbi Chia's sons went down to the villages where they had their family estate. They stayed there so long that they forgot their learning and they struggled to remember what they had learned. One of the sons said to the other, "Does our father, who is no longer alive, know of this pain that we are suffering?" Do you think that our deceased father knows that what's bothering us in this world? Good question, right? The other replied, "How could he know if he's dead? For after all, it is written in the verse in Job, his sons may attain honor and he, the dead father, will not know of it." The other replied, "But does he then not know? Why is it written? It is written in the very next verse, but his flesh will pain him and his spirit will mourn for him." And Rabbi Yitzchak said in explanation of that verse, the worm is as painful to the dead as the needle is to the living flesh. And we know what a needle feels like to living flesh. But as painful as the needle is to living flesh, is the worm to the dead. What does that mean? The dead person feels the pain of the worms eating his flesh. Now, not pretty, but it's the best way to go. I mean, it's not exactly like fire would be less painful, right? You with me, right? Not for me. Neither. You don't take either option. Oh, you're fine. So the dead person feels the pain of the worms eating his flesh as much as a living person feels a needle piercing his skin. Isn't that interesting, right? Rashi points out that the dead body does not actually feel the pain. Not the dead body, rather the departed soul is pained by the knowledge of the body's decomposition. So it's not that you feel the pain. It's not like you're not alive anymore, but your soul is conscious of the deconstruction of its body. And it pains him to feel. It's kind of like, I went back to the shul where I grew up in the first 7 years of my life, was Springs Hebrew Congregation in Springs, South Africa. And I've never actually been back there because I know what it looks like right now. I know that it's turned into a church. It's a church. Yeah. So it would pain me to go back there to see it. Not that I'm feeling the pain of what goes on over there, but that it will hurt me. The awareness will hurt me. It's my former home, right? Same thing. The soul senses senses pain from the body, which is being decomposed. In other words, what we need to know is that the deceased are conscious of what's going on in this world. It's not like they completely forgot about this world, right? If the dead are aware of the pain of their bodies, presumably then our Father is then aware of our pain as well. Right? This, by the way, this whole concept relates to when we walk in a cemetery today. You're supposed to tuck in your tzitzis. Tzitzis are the fringes of our four-cornered garments, which hang out of our trousers. At least the Hasidic custom is to wear the tzitzis hanging out of your trousers. But when you go to a cemetery, you're supposed to tuck them in. Why? So as not to insult the dead. Why would you be insulting the dead? That we can do mitzvahs and they cannot do mitzvahs. Now, if they're dead and unconscious, then what difference would it make? What's the big deal? Soul is still there. But the fact of the matter is that their soul is conscious of the fact that they are no longer able to do mitzvahs in this world, and that you, who are walking near the grave, can do mitzvahs, and it pains them. So clearly they are aware and conscious of what's going on in this world after they leave this world. So Rabbi Chia earlier insisted that a person who allows his tzitzis to drag over the graves insults the dead, which shows that the dead are aware of the insult. And that is the reason for this discussion about the awareness of the conscious. The fact of the matter is we don't flaunt our tzitzis when we walk through a cemetery to this very day because they are conscious. But let's expand on this. The Gemara rejects this proof. The scholars in the study hall answered that the dead know of their own pain, but they do not know of the pain of others. The fact that the dead feel the pain of the worms does not show us that Rabbi Chia was aware of his son's suffering. So in other words, you want to tell me the story from Job about the pain of the body's decomposition, being aware that the soul is aware of the pain of its own body's decomposition. That's fine, because the soul might be aware of its own pain, but it's not necessarily aware of the pain of others. And here we're introduced to a beautiful story from the other world, which will shed light and a lot to think about. I think we'll give you a lot to talk about with your spouse about after you come home today. All right? You ready? Let's go. Let's see what's going on. If YouTube has picked up just yet. Keith, good morning. Keith is on YouTube. Fantastic. All right, great. Nice crowd on YouTube and Facebook as well. Thank you. All right, great to see everybody here this morning. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free. Here goes. The Gemara continues to debate this issue, but do they not know of the affairs of this world? Why we see otherwise from that which was taught in a Braisa, in the oral Torah, as follows. There was an incident with a certain pious man. He was either Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai or Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Either way, he was a Talmudic sage. Now, this pious man gave a dinar as charity to a poor man on Erev Rosh Hashanah in a year of famine. So there was no money. And he gave a dinar. I guess that's like, I don't know, think about it, like $100. Yeah, I think it's something significant, right? He gave this guy money in a year of famine, and his wife, the rabbi's wife, made him upset about it. She didn't take it well. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai was very, very poor, and likely he gave away his very last dinar. Morning, Miriam. So he gave away his very, very last dinar. Now, how would your wife react if you gave away your last dinar in a year of famine, right? Think about it, right? So here's what she did to him. She made him so upset that he went and spent the night of Rosh Hashanah in a cemetery. I mean, it must have been pretty bad. It's one thing to sleep in the doghouse. Sleep on the couch, right? If you're going to go to the cemetery, I mean, seriously, there must have been one serious argument. Right? Okay. So here's what happens. And while there, he's spending the night of Rosh Hashanah in the cemetery. While there, he heard two spirits of girls who had died. Now, it says over here, it's interesting because I know, Marty, this is something that's going to be very, very interesting to you. Oh, Joji, where in the Talmud are we? We are in Tractate Barachos. We're at the beginning of chapter 3. We're actually on folio 18b. If you're following in Safaria, which, by the way, is an app that I want to encourage everybody to download. Safaria, I think you can get it on your iPhone. You could probably get it online as well. Just go to Safaria, Sefari. You know what, Joji? Just post the link, if you don't mind, into the comments of this page. Safaria is online, website, the app, whatever. And go to Barachos, the first tractate of Talmud, 18b is where we are. Okay, good. So this is going to be relevant to you, Marty, because it says that the soul, the two spirits of girls who had died were talking to each other. Now, the Talmud points out that which part of the souls are talking to each other? The nefesh, the lowest part of the souls, remains with the body after death. The neshama, however, which is more elevated part of the soul, separates from the body after death and ascends to the higher realms, right? As does the ruach, right? Okay. Now, in this case, the Gemara here speaks of ruach, which is higher than nefesh, lower than neshama, is that part of the soul which is intermediate between nefesh and neshama, and that which sometimes remains with the dead body and sometimes roams free and goes up to higher realms where the neshama is found. And that's, as you'll see in the story, this soul was a roaming soul. Good morning, Mickey. Welcome to this morning's Torah study. Your favorite topic, Mickey, it's stories from the other world. Take a look, see what happens. All right. So while he heard two spirits of girls who had died. So this guy's sleeping in the cemetery on Rosh Hashanah night, and he's over here in the conversation. One said to the other, "My friend, come and roam the world with me, and hear from behind the curtain, hear from behind the divine presence, the world what misfortune is to come to the world this year. So in other words, let's go and find out. Let's go behind the stage to find out what harsh decrees were issued when the world was judged on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. It's the night of Rosh Hashanah now, right? Let's get the inside scoop. Her friend replied, I cannot come with you because I am buried in a mat of reeds. I think I mentioned the story the other day on the way out here because I recently studied the story, so I mentioned it, yeah. Then you're a Torah scholar. You see, you're a scholar of the community. You're like, I've learned this Talmud before, right? I know this, right? So she said, I cannot go because I'm buried in a mat of reeds. What's wrong with being buried in a mat of reeds? There's a lot to talk about. My understanding of this Talmud is that you're supposed to bury a person in shrouds, in linen shrouds, which decompose quickly. Because if you embalm the body, or if you put the body in a mausoleum, which also involves some sort of preservative process, then the soul cannot be redeemed. The soul cannot soar from the body. It's trapped. It's tethered to the body so long as the body has not yet decomposed. So because she was preserved in some sort of a mat of reeds and not linen shrouds, therefore she said, my body is not yet decomposed. I cannot go free. I'm stuck. I'm tethered. I'm rooted to the spot. Can you imagine what happens when somebody buries their loved ones on the 10th floor of a mausoleum, right up there 20 feet in the sky, and they're baking in the hot Florida sun, and they're, God forbid, they're preserved, they're embalmed. What happens? They say it takes 10 years for the body to decompose. So for 10 years, that soul is suffering as it is tethered to that body. It's not free to go. It's like, imagine if you sell your house and the new buyers come and move in, but you can't leave. You have to live like out in the garden for 10 years because you can't leave because you're stuck, right? It's a problem, right? The other extreme of that is cremation, where in cremation, the soul is, the body is totally burned to a crisp instantaneously. And that is the total opposite. It is an absolute shock and trauma to the soul from which I don't know if the soul ever recovers from that. It is absolutely traumatic. In the same way, it would be traumatic for you if a business that you built up your whole life suddenly burns down overnight and you're left penniless. Thank you, Joe G, for posting the link to Safari. Everybody can click on the link. I see Winston also posted it. Both Winston from Indonesia and Joe G from West Palm posted the link to Safaria, the Talmud that we're learning, if anybody wants to follow along. And good morning, Robert Saunders. Welcome to today's Torah study. Winston, if you don't mind posting it to YouTube as well, so the guys on YouTube can see it as well. Fantastic. All right. So here's what happened. She says, I cannot roam. Here, let's take a look at the note here. Surely the body itself does not leave the grave, and the other spirit was proposing only that their spirits leave the grave and roam, not the bodies, right? What difference then is there how the body was covered when she was buried? We can say, though, that the spirit appears dressed in the same clothing as the body itself, and it would be embarrassed for the other spirits to see it dressed in reeds. Very interesting. The way you buried is the clothing that you wear in the world to come in heaven. Even though it disintegrates, right? It's different things. The clothing that you wore on Shabbos is the clothing that you wear when the body resurrects with the coming of Mashiach. So if you walked around in short pants and whatever, then it won't be appropriate to walk around and greet Mashiach in your short pants, right? But the way you dressed on Shabbos is the way that you'll dress when your body's resurrected. But the way that you're buried is the way that your soul appears. The clothing in which your soul appears. Such linen shrouds is how everybody is dressed, which is appropriate. But if you're in a bed of reeds, it's not appropriate. Alternatively, Tzlach explains that their concern was not of being ashamed. Rather, we find that as long as the body is not decomposed, the spirit cannot separate from it. For this reason, the dead are buried in linen shrouds, which decompose quickly, and thus do not slow down the body's decomposition. Being too poor to afford proper linen shrouds, the family of this girl buried her in a sturdy reed matting. Therefore, her body was unable to decompose quickly, and that is why she said that her spirit could not roam freely. Right. So anyway, the spirit the two spirits that were being overheard in heaven in the in the graveyard, these spirits in the cemetery. Yeah, we just learned before. Somebody told me that the difference in a graveyard and a cemetery actually is that a graveyard is like a burial place next to a church. A cemetery is an official burial ground. Okay, so he's sleeping in the cemetery and he overhears the one spirit telling the other, let's go in Rome and find out the harsh decrees that were put out against the world for this year in heaven. And she says, I can't go because I'm not dressed properly or I'm not buried properly. So she went and roamed. Just to answer a question that was posted by Rob Berger. What about the Jews buried in the burned in the crematoriums? Obviously, it's not their fault. When a Jew chooses to be cremated, that is a tragedy. But if a Jew is cremated, God forbid, then it's certainly not their fault, and they cannot be held liable or accountable. Obviously, it's a torture for the body. Obviously, for the soul, it's a torture. But it's not something that they're ever going to have to be held liable for. I'm sure that if somehow in heaven they'll find a way to compensate them. Why are Jews buried with a talus? For the same reason. Talus, same reason. You bury a Jew with a talus because that's how they, it's a holy prayer shawl, and it's something that decomposes quickly with the body, like a linen shroud. The Rebbe was buried with his Torah table, where he studied Torah. They made the coffin out of the Torah table. Yeah. Okay, so she went and roamed, but she said, but you go and come back and tell me whatever you hear, right? So let's see what happens in the story. So she went and roamed and returned, and her friend then said to her, my friend, what have you heard from behind the curtain? She replied, I heard that the crops of anyone who plants this winter at the time of the first rain will be destroyed by hail. Hearing this, the pious man went and planted at the time of the second rain. He didn't plant at this first rains of the season. He planted at the second rain. In this end, everyone else's crops that were planted at the time of the first rain were destroyed, and his were not destroyed. So he obviously made a lot of money. This is insider trading, right? The next year, he again went and spent the night in the cemetery. He figured, no, it was good for business. Not sure if he went because his wife made him go or not. Good morning, Lucy Brown. Nice to see you. And he heard the same two spirits talking to each other. One said to the other, let us roam the world and hear from behind the curtain what misfortune is to come to the world this year. The same two spirits, right? She replied, my friend, did I not already tell you that I cannot come with you because I'm buried in a matting of reeds? Still problem, right? But you go and tell me whatever you hear. So she went and roamed and returned. The friend then said to her, my friend, what have you heard from behind the curtain? She replied, I heard that the crops of anyone who plants this winter at the time of the second rain will be blasted. Here in this, he went and planted at the time of the first rain. I guess the guys now that planted last year's first rains probably wanted to wait this year to the second rain, right? In the end, everyone else's crops were blasted and his were not blasted. His wife curiously asked him, they're making a lot of money now. His wife curiously asks him, why is it that last year everyone else's crops were destroyed by hail, yet yours were not destroyed, and now everyone else's crops were blasted, yet yours were not blasted? He told her the entire story. You see, everything that happens for a reason. It's for charity. He told her the whole story. Remember, you were angry with me for giving away my last dinar. I went to sleep in the cemetery. This is what happened. They say, the Talmud concludes, they say that just a few days passed when a quarrel broke out between the pious man's wife, who just learned of the story, and the mother of that child. The mother of the child that was buried in a mat of reeds. And in the course of that quarrel, the pious man's wife said to the mother, come, I will show you your daughter disgracefully buried in a matting of reeds. In other words, she told her, you should know that your daughter's suffering. I know that your daughter's suffering. It's a horrible thing to tell her. Ugh. The next year, the third year, he again went and spent the night in the cemetery. And he heard the same spirits talking to each other. One said to the other, my friend, let us roam the world and hear from behind the curtain what misfortune is to come to the world this year. So this was a restless soul, this one, hey? It's like ants in her pants. She couldn't sit still, this one, right? So she replied, my friend, leave me be. The words that we have spoken between ourselves in the years past have already been heard amongst the living. And this is how the Talmud concludes. We see the Talmud concludes that the dead do know what is being spoken by the living, since this spirit was aware of what her mother had been told. And that, my friends, is the Talmud story today, which tells us so much, and there's so much to discuss about this. I'd love to hear your input and your comments. So we learn from the story that, first of all, you don't just disappear and become merely a picture on the wall after you die, or a memory. You're alive and well. When you're alive in this world, you're alive inside of a physical body. When you leave this world, you leave behind your physical body, but that doesn't mean you terminate, you're all done, you're kaput. That doesn't mean that. It means that you no longer have a physical body, but your soul, your eternal piece of God, which is your soul, lives on forever. Not only does the soul live on in the next world, but also the soul is connected to this world. We learn that the deceased still are connected to this world, and they know what's going on. Elsewhere we learn that when someone passes away, their loved ones come and greet them within 30 days before they come to heaven. And I've seen such people, tell me that they just saw their loved ones, a deceased wife, a deceased husband, a deceased relative. They just see them. Sometimes in a coma, they come, they slip in and out of consciousness. They talk about these things. They say that, and I sense that means that they're very, very close, because the deceased in the next world know who's about to come. They get the memo. They know who's down here, and they know what's going on. And that's why we dedicate today's Torah study by Diane Weinberg, to her grandmother, Ita Bas Yitzchak, whose yard set is a few days ago. Ita Bas Yitzchak is aware of what we're doing right now. And her soul is being elevated through today's Torah study, which relates exactly to her and her connection to Diane. That she knows we're studying Torah in her merit and in her honor, elevating her soul in Gan Eden. Which tells us that when we come to Shul and Yizkor memorial services 4 times a year, when we do that, we're not just us remembering them, but it's actually them connecting with us. I've seen written that one of the reasons why we ask the people whose parents are alive to leave the shul is in order to make room for those people, those souls that are deceased, to join us in shul. It's interesting, right? Obviously, they wouldn't need space, physical space, but it's just an interesting perspective to share on a very difficult enigma, something that we all struggle with. And we draw a lot of strength, we draw a lot of insight from this fascinating story here in the Talmud, where we see the sons of Rabbi Chia that were arguing amongst themselves about whether their father is aware of their pain. And the Talmud at this point concludes that yes, they do know. They do know what's going on in this world. They're aware and conscious about us. They pray for us. They intercede on our behalf before God. And that's the reason why we visit the cemetery. We don't just go to the cemetery to remember times gone by, for sweet memories. We go to the cemetery to connect with the souls of our loved ones, to ask them to intercede with God on our behalf. We go, we tell them good news, we share with them our anxieties and concerns, and we ask them, turn to God, please. Maybe you got some connections upstairs. Maybe you know someone. You know someone who knows someone, right? And that's what we do to be able to connect with our loved ones. And that's the reason why we go to visit the graves of the righteous. We'll go to the Ohel, to the Rebbe's graveside, or any other righteous deceased people. In Israel, it's a big deal. We go to Mount of Olives, of course, is to visit our own loved ones. It's the oldest cemetery in the world that's still in use 3,000 years later. But when you go to, especially the north of Israel, it's what I call graveyard tourism. Many, in the north of Israel, it's very beautiful. You go to visit the various graves of our ancient sages throughout the generations. You go to visit the grave of David in Jerusalem, and he's in the Old City. And then there's the grave of Jesse, who's the father of David, and Ruth, who's the great-grandmother of David. And they're buried in Hebron. And there's Rabbi Akiva. Well, where's he buried? He's in the Galilee. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar. Oh, of course, the patriarchs and the matriarchs, as well as Adam and Eve, that are all buried in Hebron. And throughout that whole north of Israel, you see all sorts of graves of all sorts of individuals that we learn about in the Torah all the time, and you go to visit them. And we don't just go there because we say, hey, it's nice to see a grave here, but we actually connect with them spiritually. It was midnight when we were doing a tour of a Jewish, we brought our community to Israel, and it was midnight in Tzfat. So I asked the people, anybody want to join me down in the cemetery in the middle of the night? We went to visit the mikveh of the Arizal, the holy Arizal. It's known that anybody who dips in his mikveh, there's a tradition that person will not die before they do teshuvah, before they do the return to God, right? So it's worth it to dip in the freezing mikveh, middle of the night. And after that, we went to visit his grave. And somebody said, I hope that 500 years after I die, somebody will come to me in the middle of the night to visit my grave as well. But there's a reason for this. We're not just being superstitious or sentimental. We are being scientific. Because according to the, is it the third law of thermodynamics?
Energy cannot be created or destroyed.
Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy can never be created or destroyed. And what that means is that if that's true of electrical energy and kinetic energy and mechanical energy and every kind of energy in this world, how much more so would it be true of life itself? Life itself, which is so much more powerful than the current in your light bulb, right? Or your anything, the power of motion. Life itself is obviously more powerful, and therefore, energy is never lost. It's scientific. It would be unscientific to say that death is the end of our existence. It would be scientific to say that death is the transformation of our life, physical life, into a spiritual form of life. So with that, friends, a lot to think about. I thank you for joining me here today, and want to wish everybody a wonderful day. Feel free to send me an email with any questions or comments, rabbi@jewishgardens.com. It's a pleasure studying with you today. Shalom and take care, friends. Be well. Bye-bye.